Hello, everybody. Hey, where we last left off, we were talking about, starting our chapter on biodiversity, and we were talking about keystone species and how they're important to an entire ecosystem. And if they get somehow wiped out, they really affect every other organism in that ecosystem where they live. All right, so we're continuing on with our notes a little bit today about the importance of having different species. All right, so a lot of times now we are talking about, especially these days, right, trying to develop drugs and everything that are helpful to medicinally to people. And there are many plants that are important for us for making those drugs, and also for helping us produce food, of course, and clothing items, and, things you would make your house out of, so for shelter. So all of these are really important uses of plants, and in addition, sometimes fungi. But did you know that 74% of the top 150 prescription drugs used in the U.S. are derived from plants? So plants are pretty important. And antibiotics are often derived from chemicals that are found in fungi. All right, so just some examples of those plants and things that we make from plants. The velvet bean, we get L-dopa from that, which is a treatment for Parkinson's disease. And Parkinson's, of course, affects the person's brain, and eventually, they have trouble with motor skills, and they might shake, but eventually they kind of get to the point where they don't remember things too. The coca plant is used as an anesthetic and as the basis for making many other anesthetics. The rosy periwinkle is used as a treatment for leukemia and Hodgkin's disease. Right, so there's all the time people are always researching new drugs and making them from plants and fungi. So it would be very important to have a variety of plants, right? Because we're talking about biodiversity. All right, and of course we get, like I said before, like clothing is made from plants. Like you probably wear cotton stuff all the time, or maybe wool in the wintertime. That all comes from plants. And our food, definitely, you should be eating lots of plants, right? You eat salads and vegetables and fruits. But many of those foods we get from like crossing or, hybridizing those plants. And so we're crossing the genetic material from different species to try to get the characteristics that we like in foods, right? So, if you've ever been out walking in your yard, you might have wild strawberries growing out there, and you can recognize them because they're like little tiny, it looks like a strawberry, but it's like little tiny. But that's not the kind you see in the grocery store, right? When you're buying strawberries, those Driscoll strawberries that are like large and sweet and juicy, they've been, hybridized to look like that and to taste like we want them to. Right, and sometimes they breed plants also to have other characteristics, like, just being able to not bruise as easily or to last longer on the shelf. So, if we had to depend on only a few types of plants for food, that would be trouble, because what if you have a disease that comes along and wipes out all that particular kind of plant, big trouble. And we know about diseases just showing up, right? Like viruses out of nowhere. All right. So you hear a lot these days about GMOs, and GMO stands for genetically modified organisms, right? And you might even look at some of the food you buy in the grocery store, and it might even say on the packaging, non-GMO, So they're trying to tell you there's nothing in here that's been genetically modified. Well, that's probably the case for most stuff, because there's only 10 approved genetically modified crops that are currently being produced in the United States. Now, there are more than 10, of course, because, there's just lots of them out there, but only 10 of them are currently being produced and sold in the United States, right? So a GMO is some kind of organism, and it could be a food item, like a crop that's a food item, but it doesn't have to be. It could be something else as well, like, cotton or something. But it's had part of its genome engineered in the lab through the introduction of genes from another organism. So its genes have been altered in some way. Now, some people don't like that because they're afraid that, especially if it's a food item and you eat it, that they don't know exactly how that genetically modified portion of that is going to, is that going to have some bad effect on you if you eat it? So that's, I guess, the big concern, right? Well, those 10 crops that are grown and produced in the United States, this picture has all 10 of them here, sort of little vertical slits of them. But we have genetically modified corn, soybeans, cotton, canola, which they make canola oil from, which you might use for cooking, sugar beets, alfalfa, which is like a grass that, your cow Bessie might eat, papayas, squash, Arctic apples, and innate potatoes. All right, and they all have been, they all have some quality that the biologists were looking to engineer, whether it be for taste or to prevent disease or something like that. All right, so are GMOs good or bad? Well, I want to show you this video. I'm going to see if I can do it and still put this on Veracross. If not, I'll put it on YouTube, this whole video I'm making now. Okay? All right, so here we go.
With Cas9 GFP from Millpore Sigma, you're finally able to visualize your CRISPR transfection. Cas9 GFP is a fusion protein that helps scientists have confidence in their CRISPR experiments within moments of introducing it.
GMOs are one of the most controversial areas of science. Genetic engineering is used in many fields, but even though medical applications like GM insulin are widely accepted, the debate heats up when it comes to food and agriculture. Why is that? Why is the same thing treated so differently? Let's try to get to the bottom of this and explore the facts, the fears, and the future of GMOs. Humans have been genetically modifying plants and animals for thousands of years. Maybe a few of your crops had very good yields, maybe one of your wolves was especially loyal. So you did the smart thing and bred the plants and animals that had traits beneficial to you. Traits are just an expression of genes. So with each generation, those genes got more pronounced. After thousands of years, almost every single plant and animal around us is vastly different from its pre-domesticated state. If humans have been changing genes for millennia, what makes a so-called genetically modified organism, or GMO, different? Selective breeding is basically hoping for lucky hits. Genetic engineering eliminates this factor. We can choose the traits we want, make fruit grow bigger, immune to pests, and so on. So why are people concerned about them? Let's start with one of the most common objections to GMOs. Gene flow, meaning GM crops could mix with traditional crops and introduce unwanted new characteristics into them. There is a method that might guarantee complete prevention, but is a big anti-GMO argument by itself: terminator seeds. The idea is that they could produce sterile plants, requiring farmers to buy new seeds every year. The very concept of this, however, caused a public outcry, stopping the technology being put to use. This brings us back to the unintentional spreading of engineered DNA. There have been cases of GMOs growing where they weren't planted and traces of modified genes found in foreign crops. But GM plants can't run wild entirely. Many crops pollinate themselves, and all crops have to be related to mingle. There are also cultural methods like buffer zones to keep unintentional crossing at a minimum. But if it's possible in principle that a GMO could unintentionally cross with a non-GMO, there's actually a more important question. Is food that comes from GM crops different to food from non-GM crops? This question has been a major concern from the very beginning. GM plants that are destined to be eaten are checked for possible dangers, and the results are evaluated by multiple agencies. After more than 30 years and thousands of studies, the science is in. Eating GMO plants is no more risky than their non-GMO equivalent. But don't just take our word for it. Sources for this and other claims are in the video description. But what about plants that have been engineered to be toxic? For example, Bt crops. A gene borrowed from the bacterium Bacillus thuringiensis lets engineered plants produce a protein that destroys the digestive system of specific insect pests. The plant makes its own pesticide. Insects that eat it die. That sounds alarming. Pesticide sprays can be washed off, while the poison in Bt crops is inside the plant. But actually, it's not a big deal. Poison is really just a question of different perspectives. What's harmless to one species might kill another. Coffee, for example, is a poison that kills insects but is harmless to us. Or take chocolate. It's dangerous for dogs, but a pleasure for humans. Bt crops produce a protein that is tailored to the specific design of the digestive tract of certain insects. It's completely harmless for us. There's also the opposite approach. Plants that are engineered to be resistant to certain weed killers. This way, farmers can use them widely, killing the other plants competing for resources without harming the crop. Here we get to the dark underbelly of GMOs. For the pesticide industry, they are big business. Over 90% of all cash crops in the US are herbicide resistant, mostly to glyphosate. As a result, the use of glyphosate has increased greatly. That isn't only bad. Glyphosate is much less harmful to humans than many other herbicides. Still, this means farmers have a strong incentive to rely on this one method only, casting more balanced ways of managing weeds aside. That's one of the most fundamental problems with the GMO debate. Much of the criticism of this technology is actually criticism of modern agriculture and the business practice of the huge corporations that control our food supply. This criticism is not only valid, it's also important. We need to change agriculture to a more sustainable model. GMOs as a technology are actually an ally and not an enemy in that fight, helping to save and protect nature and minimize our impact on the environment. Let's look at some positive examples. Eggplant is an important crop in Bangladesh, but often whole harvests are destroyed by pests. Farmers had to rely heavily on pesticides. Not only was this very expensive, farmers also frequently got sick. The introduction of a new GM eggplant in 2013 stopped this. The same Bt protein we talked about before, an effective killer of insects but harmless to humans, was engineered into them. This reduced insecticide use on eggplants by more than 80%. The health of farmers improves and their income rose dramatically. and sometimes a GM approach is the only option. In the 1990s, the papaya industry in Hawaii was under attack from the ring spot virus, which threatened to wipe out Hawaiian papaya. The solution was a papaya genetically modified to be vaccinated against the virus. Without it, the state's papaya industry would have collapsed. All these stories show a very narrow application. 99% of all GMOs we use right now produce pesticides or are resistant against them. There is so much more we could do. Scientists are working on GMOs that could improve our diet. Plants that produce more or different nutrients, like fruit with higher antioxidant levels that help to fight diseases, or rice with additional vitamins. On a larger scale, we're trying to engineer plants that are more resilient to climate change. Plants that can better adapt to erratic weather and adverse soil conditions, making them resistant to droughts or floods. GMOs could also not only reduce agriculture's impact on the environment, but actively help to protect it. Scientists are working on crops that can draw nitrogen from the air like microbes. Nitrogen is a common fertilizer, but its buildup pollutes the groundwater and speeds up climate change. Plants that collect their own nitrogen could fix two problems at once: the overuse of fertilizers in the developed world, as well as the shortage of it in developing countries. We could even modify plants to become super effective carbon collectors like the American chestnut tree, to mitigate and actually reverse climate change. With the tools we have today, our imagination is the limit. The world eats 11 million pounds of food every day. A UN estimate suggests we'll need 70% more by 2050. We could grow that food by clearing more and more forests to create fields and pastures, and by using more pesticides. Or we find a way to do it on the land we've got right now with more effective methods like GM crops. Intensifying farming instead of expanding it means GMOs could become the new organic. In a nutshell, GMOs have the potential to not only drastically change agriculture, but to also dampen the effects of our own irresponsible behavior. GMOs could be our most powerful weapon to save our biosphere. This video took more than 600 hours to make, which would be impossible without viewer support on patreon.com. If you'd like to support carefully researched content made with love, it's really very helpful, and you can get your own bird as a reward. If you want to learn more about genetic modification, we have more videos explaining the opportunities and risks of the technology and how it could impact.
Okay, I'm back. All right. Obviously, that was very pro-GMO. And actually, like last year in Envirothon, our presentation that we had to make was about farming and agriculture. And the farmers that we talked to actually were pretty pro-GMO also. They like the crops such as soybeans and corn because they do have to use less pesticides and so forth with those. So, all right, so what I'm going to be asking you guys to do, and you have more than a day to do this, so don't freak out. But normally at school, I would have had you guys do this little GMOs mini project. And I'm still going to ask you to do that. Okay, so let me switch over to that real quick. Okay. All right, so what you'll be doing is you will be working to make a PowerPoint presentation about a particular genetically modified organism. And so I'll assign you a particular one to work on, and what you'll be doing is finding out certain things about it. Of course, you'll know its name, but you'll find out what its genus and species name is. That's its scientific name. A picture of it, and then a description of the process that is involved in genetically modifying it. Like, how did they do it? What is the deal? Right? So a good description of that, and then some of the risks and benefits that are associated with this crop. You know, what are people concerned about with it, and what are people like happy and thinking like, oh, we get all this good stuff from making this crop modification. All right, and then also very important, I want your opinion after you do all the reading and research about your particular organism or food item. Do you think that it's a good thing that we have this GMO, or is it a bad thing? And I don't want you to just say good or bad. I would like for you to explain your reasoning about why you have this opinion, based on what you've learned about it. So this should be well explained. And then finally, you would have a slide about with your references on there. And I'm thinking probably you'd want to have 3 references. So at a minimum, you need 6 slides, which includes the references slide, right? This is a small project. That's why I'm calling it a mini project, right? And then I also, since we're not at school together, we would normally do a presentation in front of the class. So I'm going to ask you guys you could do one of 2 things. You could either get somebody to make a video of you showing your PowerPoint slides and going through the information in a professional manner, or you could do like I've been doing here, where you record your voice and doing the presentation and send me the recording. And the program that I use to make your videos is called Screencast-O-Matic, and it's a free program as long as you have 15 minutes or less of video time. It's free, and I would expect your presentation to be less than 15 minutes. So you have that option. You can either record yourself, get somebody to record you, with your computer and going through the slides and explaining it, or you could do a voiceover and record your screen like I do. Either way, it should be professional, right? And then I think you can do that and get that done by next Tuesday, which would be March 31st by 11:59, and here's the grading rubric for it, and you can see it's going to be worth 40 points. So I will put this file, in Veracross and send you in an email so you have this, and I'll also assign you a particular GMO crop to work on. All right, and if you have questions, you can always email me, or you can go through Teams on the chat thing for our class, and I can answer questions that way too. Okay? All right. Let's see. Go back here. Where were we? Marco. It's Marco the cat making a guest appearance. Hi, Marco. Okay. All right. Went kind of far here. All right, then. I will see you guys soon, and have a good weekend. Bye.